Thank you very much for the warm words of welcome and the lovely preamble. And I just am very privileged to be here. I always say, and this isn't just me pandering to the crowd here in the room as well as here on Zoom, I genuinely do enjoy my visits to the Philippines, and it's such a privilege to be here at UP Diliman and the Asian Center to talk about my most recent book. So I hope that my clicker works. Yes, it does. Without further ado, I'm going to try and cram in as much information as I possibly can. Just going to have a look at the time. Also put my phone on airplane mode, just in case I get messages from embarrassing apps. So, Boys Love Media in Thailand. So I'm really here to kind of talk about my second book, which came out last year in around October with Bloomsbury in the Asian Media and Fandom Studies series, which has just launched at Bloomsbury. I'm one of the associate editors of this series as well, so it was really quite a privilege for me to be the first book out with the series and to kind of have a venue for this work I've been doing, looking at this extremely exciting and I argue queer and transnational form of popular culture coming out of Thailand that I've been looking at now for almost a decade. So I thought that we should probably begin with a brief introduction to what BL is. And I really actually want to thank the previous remarks for giving us an introduction to Love of Siam, which retroactively is now considered to be a BL movie, but when it was released, was a little bit more complicated in its reception and promotion. Some of you may be familiar with the fact that when it was originally promoted in Thailand, they kind of sold it as a kind of heterosexual love comedy. And then, surprise, why are these boys kissing? Because it's better. No. So I'm just going to show you a brief clip. This is a trailer for actually more like a teaser for a BL series that was released in 2020. It's called Why Are You the series, and it stars two big names in Thai entertainment, Saint Supapong and Zee Panik. Just going to show you this so you can have an idea of what BL looks like currently. It's a bit old now, 4 years old, but I still think it's a kind of cute, quick little intro. So hopefully the sound like it's going to play. Oops.
หรือมึงคิดว่ากูชอบมึงหรือมึงคิดว่ากูชอบมึงมึงก็พิสูจน์ให้กูเห็นดิมึงกล้าปะมึงก็พิสูจน์ให้กูเห็นดิมึงกล้าปะพรุ่งนี้ไปทะเลกันและค่อยกลับมาเคลียร์ปัญหาต่างๆไปทะเลกันและค่อยกลับมาเคลียร์แต่พี่ไฟต้องสัญญากับผมนะว่าพี่จะเปิดใจกับทุกอย่างนะแล้วถ้ากูว่าพี่จะเปิดใจกับทุกอย่างแล้วถ้ากูมากกว่าเปิดใจอ่ะเธอคือความฝันที่ฉันฝันรอมานานเป็นความรักที่งดงามส่งนำทางวันที่ฉันไม่เหลือใครเธอคือสิ่งนี้คือรักที่ยิ่งใหญ่เป็นความจริงที่ทำให้ใจอบอุ่นทุกครั้งหรือมึงคิดว่ากูชอบมึงมึงก็พิสูจน์ให้กูเห็นดิมึงกล้าปะพรุ่งนี้ไปทะเลกัน
Outside of Japan nowadays, yaoi is a term from the 1980s that referred to parodic works that had often homoerotic undertones and that were unofficially produced. But yaoi is often used as a synonym to refer to boys' love in many regions, such as the Anglophone world, where it also has a bit of a kind of meaning along the lines of sexually explicit works, but that meaning doesn't exist in Japan. I would also note that in Thailand, whilst I'm going to be talking about Thai boys' love and Thai BL, in the Thai language, these works are known as Y media, and that Y stands for yaoi. It also is increasingly standing for yuri, which is a genre of girls' love, which we're seeing emerge. It focuses on the sexual and romantic relationships between men, particularly an archetype known as the Bishonen, a beautiful male youth. And historically, it was predominantly produced for and by women. In the past, we often would say heterosexual women, though increasingly historical work as well as contemporary work, such as my own, is indicating that maybe these women weren't as straight as they both considered themselves to be back in the 70s as well as nowadays. And indeed, my own work on Japan and in my first book excavated the often underappreciated fact that gay men and bisexual men also are big fans of BL in Japan, though there are tensions around its reception. So we have seen this massive explosion of what in Thai are called series Y, which means Thai BL, Y series. And I'm just going to call it Thai BL from now on because it's a bit easier and more recognized term outside of Thailand. It is unbelievable to think about how many series and just the explosion of this popular culture form. When I first encountered what is considered to be, at least what I argue to be, the first ever boys' love television series in Thailand back in 2014, it's called Lovesick, the series. It was broadcast on a public channel called MCOT, and it was quite revolutionary. A lot of us were quite shocked to see this being broadcast in a kingdom that has a very conservative media culture, despite fantasies and myths that circulate outside Thailand around the fact that it is a highly kind of LGBTQ plus friendly society. Until very recently, that was a statement that would be untrue. I think things have changed quite rapidly, and the emergence of Thai BL is part and parcel of those broader transformations. Anyway, when I first discovered this stuff and was having to pirate it and engage with it through unofficial travel channels, I never believed that it would explode in the way that it has. As it says on the slide, between 2014 and 2023, we've seen about 300 series produced, Thai boys' love series produced by both mainstream producers in Thailand as well as indie producers and regional producers. And indeed, we also see kind of transnational production, particularly in investment from China and Japan. The other thing that is really quite interesting to me is I saw a post about on X, Twitter, on Twitter about maybe, I think 3 or 4 weeks ago now, saying that this year alone, there's predicted to be at least 200 BL series to be released in Thailand. That's so much content. So I often say, I used to watch it all. Now I don't have time. Yeah. So who is engaging with this media content? This data is a little bit out of date now, but I still think it's representative in many ways of what I observe on social media and when I travel to Thailand and speak to people involved in the production side of things, because I have connections there. This was a research conducted by Nielsen Research along with Line TV, a now defunct streaming service in Thailand that was instrumental in streaming Thai BL series both in Thailand and abroad. So according to that interview, according to their interview data and their survey data, approximately 80% of the fan base identified as women, and then 20% identified as men, and then that 2% of others refers to other categories of gender. Thailand has a much more expansive understanding of gender beyond this binaristic one. What I always emphasize here is that the data that this company gathered has nothing to do with sexuality. So we need to remember that just because 80% of the consumers are women, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're heterosexual women. And also the huge number of men is significant. Yes, it's a minority within the broader context, but it speaks to the fact that this genre resonates with male consumers. Once again, we don't know what their sexuality is, but I would say based on other measures of research they've done, qualitative and so forth, and observational, most of these men would probably identify as queer in some some way, shape, or form, but not necessarily. Who knows? Maybe it's a straight man who supports his girlfriend's love of BL and they watch it together. Basically, there's other data here that speaks to the fact that the main consumer base tends to be women and men in their late 20s to early 30s, which also pushes back against the idea that this is all like kind of immature teenage girls screaming over hot boys kissing. The kind of data speaks to a much more sophisticated audience. And also, if we look at measures of class and education, they all tend to align with what we could call the middle classes or even the upper middle classes within Thai society. The majority of consumers are based in major cities, predominantly Bangkok, but also other major regional cities. Though I would flag that there are increasingly rural visions of Thai BL, particularly in the Isan region, where we're seeing a regionalization of the genre, something that some colleagues of mine in Thailand have been writing about quite extensively. Okay, so the main aim of my book was to chart the emergence of this particular industry and to try and make sense of how it both produces BL and particular kinds of celebrity that have emerged through BL, as well as to see how the fandom engages with that both within Thailand and transnationally. And one of the chief arguments that I make in the book is that Thailand and the industries involved in producing BL series have generated a kind of, let's say, media content production system that in my book I argue is called the BL machine. So we have this big machinery of talent, recruitment, management, television production, and celebrity kind of fan events and magazines and all sorts of things that is all geared around selling particular fantasies tied to Thai BL. And indeed, the central figure of this are the celebrities themselves who are involved in the Thai BL industries. So this is basically an attempt by the Thai media industries in the mid-2010s to reconnect with young audiences and kind of bring them back to the world of television, bring them back to the world of serial drama, and make money again. Because, of course, as I'm sure many of you are well aware, the broadcast industry is across many contexts struggling due to various pressures placed upon them by changing consumer tastes and methods of access. So in many ways, Thailand was actually following a pathway that had been pre-established in Korea in the 1990s and early 2000s with regards to the K-pop system, in which there was a deliberate attempt to cater to young women who are particularly middle-class young women who are really the major consumer group within Thailand, and kind of cater to their fantasies and cater to their desires. And I would point to the work of Jung Min Kwon in the Korean context if you're curious to learn more about that. So my case study, and this is, if you're a fan in the Zoom or in the room, you'll be familiar with these three letters, GMM. GMM TV is a subsidiary of the broader GMM Grammy Corporation, which is one of Thailand's largest producers of media content. They began as a music production company, hence Grammy. But in the early 2010s, the company developed its own youth-oriented TV channel. It was struggling in the marketplace for the first few years of its inception, and then they kind of embraced the turn to BL. And it was really this company that has solidified and developed the practices that I argue are central to the BL industry today. And it's really their creation of a particular kind of celebrity that I tie to the idol as an image in East Asian and Southeast Asian celebrity culture. And this is the BL idol, and particularly what in the Thai language is known as kujin, which means imagined couples. So this is an adaptation predominantly of Korean idol culture, though if you're familiar with Japan, you'll also recognize the fact that there are also precedents from Japan that are influencing this. If you look at many of the stars whose images are gracing the screen during my presentation, you'll probably notice that they aesthetically kind of mimic or look very similar to Korean stars. Many of them are Sino-Thai, so they're Thai people with Chinese heritage. This is strategic and deliberate. It is responding to desires that my colleague Dredge Kang Nguyen refers to as Corpanese desires. So Korean and Japanese desires mixed together. And indeed, the current project I'm working on in Manila also seeks to extend the investigation of Corpanese desires here in the Philippines. So if anyone's curious about that, we can talk about it. But really, the main thing that the Thai BL industry was seeking to be quite blunt, monetize, was a fandom practice known as shipping. So shipping derives from the term relationshipping, and it means imagining idols and celebrities in romantic or even sexual relationships. And they're typically same sex, especially male-male, and they are central to both the J-pop and K-pop idol industries for various reasons that I don't have time to go into. But it is a huge deal in Thailand. It's a big part of fandom culture amongst young women. It's often an implicit form of imagination where you see the members of your favorite K-pop group and they like perform acts that we call skinship or staged homoeroticism, where they perform intimacy with each other. And then that incites the fan to imagine them in homosexual, romantic, or homoerotic relationships. And then they kind of consume media with the expectation that they want to see that. In the K-pop industry, this was predominantly a bottom-up practice from fans. So the companies, of course, are staging all of this. They train their idols how to do it. Many of these performances are actually highly choreographed within the context of the K-pop industry. That something that my colleague Steph Choi has written about extensively. But it's not openly kind of acknowledged, and it isn't necessarily kind of something that the companies make explicit and clear. It's something that's supposed to be considered as a fan practice. And scholarship has tended to view this as a fan practice. One of the things that the Thai BL machine has innovated, and what GMMTV did that was remarkably forward-thinking, was that they transformed this into a top-down method of managing and promoting their stars. So the way that the BL machine works and the BL idol industry works is that the company puts two male actors together, two idol actors and stars together, says, this is a ship, they're going to appear in a BL series and you can ship them. And then the fans follow that directive. So rather than it being a bottom-up fan practice, it's a top-down marketing strategy. And that is actually quite revolutionary, and that's what has led the Thai BL industry to probably be what I would argue to be the leaders of the industry within Asia currently. So let's look at how the Thai BL machine works. And I'm going to do so by looking at one of my favorite Kujin imagined couples, Tae Tawan and New Titipum. So Tae New, as they're known. So basically, these handsome boys are scouted by the company. Often they find them on social media. Sometimes they hold auditions. It's increasingly the case that GMMTV is poaching talent from other companies and corporations and so forth. And then once they've identified some kind of handsome young men and notice that there's some kind of relationship or chemistry potential, they then will cast them into a BL series. These BL series tend to be adaptations of novels within Thailand, though GMMTV is increasingly now producing its own original stories. And basically, within the BL series, these actors, the Kujin, perform parts. So if you're familiar with Tae Nu, they began their career playing the roles of Pete and, oh my God, Pete and someone remind me. Cow, oh my Lord. Sorry, like my brain is going, Archie, Archie, Archie. So I've been corrupted by cherry magic. So Pete Cow. And Pete Cow kind of perform intimacy on screen over a number of series. And then what happens is that the kind of talents begin within the context of the series to be active on social media, interacting with each other, promoting the sponsors of the show, and they continue as they move out of character as themselves, as idol talents, onto the screen, off the screen into reality. They begin to continue to perform these little acts of intimacy, and that connects them to the world of kind of the queer potentials of BL. They continue to use staged homoeroticism, but they're doing so out of character as themselves. And eventually, the aim of the BL system, the BL machine, actually is to disengage the celebrities from the characters that they play so that the fans aren't shipping the characters, which is what would happen, for example, in Japan. and they ship the celebrities themselves. And that's what happened. So how do they do that? They host fan events that are generative of BL, like kind of potential. They feature the talent in their own variety show. So Tay New has a very famous variety show called Tay New Meal Date, Gingang Gap Tay New, where they literally go on dates with each other and eat food together and bicker, like because they're famous for their bickering. And then the cycle repeats itself with the characters being the actors being recast into new BL series. So these two famously starred in the Thai adaptation of the famous Japanese BL manga, Cherry Magic. So, how does this all work? At the heart of the BL machine is a concept in the Thai language which is called fin. Fin. So, fin is actually, it derives from gay slang in Thailand, and it comes from the English term finale. And it's a term that gay men were using to replace the word in the Thai language set, which means to come, i.e., to orgasm. So fin means to orgasm, literally, to come. It was used by fans of Korean dramas and Korean idol groups in Thailand from the 2000s onwards to kind of express their sense of satisfaction and their enjoyment of the stars. And it was particularly important to shippers. So shippers would see instances between their favorite male idols in K-pop, and then they'd be like, Finn Mark, which means like, I'm so satisfied. Or if you will, I came so hard. And this basically has become what we call the effective mechanism. It's the pre-conscious. So this isn't about emotion. It's about this kind of pre-conscious kind of sense of passion or kind of interest that generates a kind of enjoyment of BL. So every BL fan is seeking this experience, this kind of intense thing called fin that the BL machine is intended to generate. And I'm sure some of you are thinking, oh, this sounds familiar to something that is also in the Philippines. This concept of kilig, this sense of like, ooh, I'm so giggle because they're so cute. Like there's that. This is like exactly the same kind of concept. Maybe there's a little bit of difference between them. I would argue that Finn has a much more sexual charge, whereas kilig is much more romantic. But they are both effective responses. And this is an effective form of media. It is designed to kind of move the viewer in particular ways. The other thing that the Thai BL machine has generated and indeed instilled into Thai media culture is what I call in the book a Sao or Num gaze. So Sao means Y girl, i.e. a BL fan who is a woman. Num means Y boy, a BL fan who is a man. They're basically the Thai language equivalents of the Japanese terms fujoshi and fudanshi, which are rotten girls and rotten boys, fans of BL. So basically, Finn is tied to this particular politics of viewing. If you are a fan of BL, you look at media in a particular way to kind of looking for these moments of heightened homoerotic tension. Traditionally, in shipping culture and BL culture and idol shipping culture in all of the other markets outside of Thailand, this has always been a viewing practice that was considered to be subversive and also considered to be about reading against the grain of the text, even if the potential was there. What the BL industry of Thailand has done has transformed this into the dominant mainstream way of consuming media. This is how you are supposed to consume BL, and it is the mainstream gaze. I argue, however, that even though it is a dominant way of viewing that is tied to particular production logics and particular celebrity management and promotion practices, it still represents what I call a queer gaze. And I think about it as a queer gaze rather than a female gaze, which is how often this kind of viewing practice has been kind of made sense of, is because it's a gaze that is viewable, that is open to anyone, as long as they possess the understandings of how BL functions and can engage with that kind of effective concept of Fin. So this is a mainstream way of viewing media in Thailand. Rather than this being a subcultural practice, media is now produced in Thailand in ways that assumes that people understand and can follow this sort of thinking. And I believe that Finn, through its entanglement with this kind of queer gaze that celebrates homoeroticism, is effectively queer. So this is a queer viewing practice with Finn operating as a queer affect. What do I mean by queer? I'm referring to queer not in identitarian terms, but in theoretical terms. Queer, according to David Halperin, a very seminal theorist working in the early 1990s, refers to whatever is at odds with the normal, the legitimate, or the dominant. It is a way of deconstructing and tearing apart the normative views and values of society, with a particular emphasis on the deconstruction and the denaturalization of the gender binary, heteronormativity, compulsory heterosexuality, homophobia, transphobia, etc. I'm not going to go into too much depth of all of these examples, but I want to just emphasize that I argue in the book that we should be considering Kujin as queer idols, not because the actors identify as members of the LGBTQ plus community, though I always stress and emphasize in all of my public engagements that we never know their gender and sexuality, and we should never assume anything about them, whether they're straight or queer or what have you. But they're queer in the sense that the function of the Kujin is queer in a broader sense because it has deconstructed and denaturalized the heteronormativity that has previously dominated Thai media culture. And the ways of viewing that the BL machine has produced has also led people to understand and appreciate the potentials of male-male intimacy beyond homosociality, to recognize that it can be romantic, that it can be sexual, and that this is a normal part of everyday life. Okay, so let's move on to the discussion of transnationality. Thai BL is not just popular in Thailand. The fact that there are fans trickling into this audience and many in the Zoom room is clear evidence of the fact that this is a highly globalized media form. Here on the slide, I just have an image depicting many of the various sites through which where Thai BL fandom has emerged over the past few years. And I know that the sign isn't necessarily clear, but one of the first areas where Thai BL developed an international popularity was actually amongst Filipino consumers. So the Philippines was actually at the forefront of Thai BL fandom, which I think is quite exciting. So the globalization, in fact, this is an anecdote I'd like to share. When I first discovered Lovesick, the series, the first ever Thai BL series, I discovered it on Facebook, on a random site that popped up thanks to the power of my algorithm and what I was studying at the time. And that Facebook group was a Philippines-based Facebook group. So I wouldn't know about Thai BL and have the career that I have without Philippine fans of Thai BL making Thai BL legible to me. Anyway, this broader globalization of Thai BL is part and parcel of something that theorists of Thai popular culture, such as myself, as well as policymakers and those involved in government and so forth, are increasingly talking about the Thai wind. So I'm sure you've heard about the Korean wave. So the Thai wind is going to blow away the Korean wave. That's the hope. I don't necessarily agree with that, but the Thai wind is this emerging broader globalization of Thai popular culture, and BL sits at the forefront of that. So I just want to talk about the impact of Thai BL here in the Philippines, and then I might wrap up. How long am I supposed to speak to? Okay. Anyway, so I've been observing Philippine fandom for Thai BL since about 2015. Like I've been observing it for almost 10 years. And I can break it down into two distinct phases, pre-2020 and post-2020. So to talk very briefly about pre-2020, since at least 2014, we have seen social media-based engagement with Thai BL amongst fans in the Philippines. This was primarily an English language fandom amongst those who had the material kind of security and means to access kind of steady internet and have the linguistic capital to engage with fan-translated English Thai BL. It was a vibrant fan community that was, even before 2020, attracting Thai BL celebrities to the Philippines for fan meetings, and it was really quite exciting. Now, in the early years, we had this really interesting situation where, Thai BL fans in the Philippines were trying to make sense of what to them was a very novel popular culture form, and they weren't necessarily familiar with the histories of BL that I recounted to you. This idea of BL as a kind of genre form that has spread around Asia since the 1990s. Many of them were not embedded in or engaging with the kind of fandom culture for BL manga from Japan that was here in the Philippines, that Kirsten has written about extensively, that has been here since at least the late 1980s, but definitely the 1990s. So fans would draw upon this weird dichotomy that they created themselves to try and make sense of BL. They would say, Thai BL is its own thing. Boys Love is from Thailand. Yaoi is from Japan. And they would make claims about the fact that Thai BL was more authentic than Japanese yaoi, which they would often position as problematic. One of the reasons that this was the case was that unlike other fandoms for Japanese yaoi or BL that had emerged at that point in time, the majority of people who were engaging with Thai BL in the kind of early stages of Philippine engagement were actually LGBTQ plus people and gay men in particular. And these gay men had kind of, I always say, drunk the Kool-Aid by believing that BL, like Japanese BL, was somehow inappropriate for gay men to consume. So they wanted to create this distinction between Thai BL and Japanese yaoi in order to justify their consumption. And that to me was a very interesting kind of experience. So here's a picture of a fan meeting that was held for a Thai BL series called 2 Moons 2, 2 Moons 2 Manila. It was held on 26th of January 2020, just before COVID happened. I was there. So the 26th of January is actually the Australian National Day. So whilst everyone back home was celebrating, yay, Australia, woo, colonialism, I was here in the Philippines swooning over handsome Thai boys kissing each other with my Filipino friends. Anyway, post 2020, something happened. And I'm sharing this image because it speaks to a dark moment in our recent history. Because, of course, immediately after I came back from this fan meeting and returned to Australia, little did I know that I would never return to the Philippines until this year because of COVID. But COVID, yes, was a nightmare for us all, but it was a blessing for the Thai BL industry because it was during 2020 when we were all stuck at home with nothing to do that this series launched. Together, the series from GMMTV, starring Bright Wachirawit and Win Metawin. This series went massively viral around East and Southeast Asia, but indeed the globe. And the Philippines was one of the many sites within which we saw more and more and more people discovering BL through the global viral hit that was Together the series, Purawa Ao Kugam. It cannot be stressed how popular Bright Win, the Kujin, the imagined couple, the sadly defunct magic couple. Sorry, Bright Win fans. They're not coming back. Look at this. This is their official. And when I say official, they're not like sanctioned by the company, but like fans have decided this is the official account. Anyway, this is the official Bright Win Philippines Twitter account I took this screenshot back in 2020, probably much larger now. 52.5 thousand followers, Philippine fans of Bright Win. Okay. The success of Together the series in the Philippines was so big that ABS-CBN snapped it up and made a Tagalog version, Tagalized dub, which I still have not been able to bring myself to watch. So Thai Boy Love, Asia Novella, there's that tag tying it to Korean and Taiwanese and Chinese drama broadcast here. It was streamed exclusively on I Want on the Kapamilya channel. And it was Tagalized so that this could then be extended to the whole Philippine nation. And indeed, to this day, we're still seeing tagalized versions of both Thai and now Korean BL. Did you know that there's a tagalized version of Semantic Error? Yeah. I'm a purist when it comes to stuff. So I've been looking at fandom for Thai BL here in the Philippines, as I said, since 2015. And I just want to kind of share with you some of the results of, why are Filipino fans so crazy for Thai BL? And it's not just because, pretty boys kissing each other. It's much more interesting. So one of the main reasons that people talk about, why Thai BL was so important to Filipinos was that it addressed the lack of queer visibility within Filipino media culture. And this is something I'll talk about in a little bit in more detail. So the fact that there were so few depictions of positive romance between men, or kind of representations that deviated from local norms, such as the representation of the butler and so forth, that people turned to Thai BL because it filled that gap. What else? There was also people who valorized Thai BL because the kind of ways in which it engaged with the politics of masculinity was a way to combat notions of masculinity here in the Philippines that privilege a kind of machismo that speaks to this kind of hardcore masculinity, hypermasculinity. And this isn't just speaking about pushing back against heteronormative media. It's also pushing back against gay male media in the Philippines, which also likewise is like, mask for mask and this kind of distaste towards other forms of masculinity. So many of my informants spoke quite positively about that. As I said, it naturalized and celebrated queerness, and I think I've lost count of how many fans of various different genders and sexualities have explicitly mentioned that within the Catholic context of the Philippines, this is particularly powerful and meaningful for them. Likewise, LGBTQ fans would draw upon their kind of consumption of Thai BL as a way to make sense of their own sexualities and gendered identities, and it became a resource that they could use to kind of make sense of themselves and their being in the world. But most importantly, and what I think needs to be celebrated, indeed speaks to the transnational, why I argue that BL is a transnational Asian queer popular culture, is that many of my interlocutors, men, women, none of the two, would say to me that, Thai BL is Asian media, right? And up until now, the only thing that we've had is Western media. And Western media doesn't resonate with us culturally, it doesn't resonate with us racially. And also, why should we be celebrating the Western, queer media from the US as a way to save and liberate us when that's just neo-colonialism? So the fact that here we have a Southeast Asian nation that we have long historical ties to, and yes, they're culturally very distinct and different, but within our kind of Asian regionalism, there's a kind of Asian solidarity that is being built here, and that this is kind of decolonial and deconstructive. And this for me is really important. What I would mention is that since 2020, this discourse that is trying to kind of separate BL away from Japan and away from other national contexts has completely evaporated in the Philippine context. And now more and more Filipino fans, including those I was meeting at BlushCon this weekend, which is a big BL convention organized by this wonderful woman in front of us, they're talking about BL is a pan-Asian genre because you have so many different expressions of it across Asia, and that it is a form of queer media that Asians have produced and can draw upon. And indeed, I was rather tongue-in-cheek. If you go to my Twitter account, you'll see that I was sniping at the US Embassy in Thailand, because they're showing some queer films for Pride Month. And I'm basically like, why is America trying to show queer films to Thailand, which produces much more queer content than America ever has? And it's better too. So here's a photo from Two Moons in Manila. So you can see the boys, and there's all these fans, and not all of these fans are Filipino. If you pay attention, there were some Japanese women there. There were some women from China, some people from Thailand. And you'll see here, like tongue in cheek, "Ana ol." This is my first real encounter with this slang term. So people calling out on the stage as the boys engage with each other, performed homoeroticism, etc. Here's another picture. "We love you, Purple Dome." They're so like Philippine crowds are so passionate. I've never been in such a It was so loud, but loud and good. And Sana All speaks to something that I've been theorizing about BL, both within the context of Thai BL, but other work that I've done. That BL operates as what I term a resource of hope. People draw upon BL as a tool to enact a kind of utopic politics, to bring into being a queer world, a world that is accepting and beautiful and so forth. So the consumption of Thai BL in the Philippines, but elsewhere, is both aspirational. So you're moving towards, we want this. When you say sana all, it's not just like some kind of like, oh yeah, you're cute. It's like, no, what is on the stage is something we want, right? And for Filipinos who have a lack of access to, legal provisions and protections that are increasingly becoming, I mean, Thailand's about to legalize marriage equality, right? And that is transformative. You can change the world. So I argue in my book that there is this kind of effective drive that Thai BL fandom is producing in contexts like the Philippines that are about taking the everyday that is often replete with discrimination, heteronormativity, and so forth, marginalization, othering, etc., and drawing upon one's fandom for BL to push back against that. So I actually argue that Killing and this sense of Sana All and the aspirational and indeed Finn is actually a highly political force. And we can see this political force being actioned in the Philippine context because one thing that the Thai BL boom has led to is the production and indeed success of Pinoy BL, local BL projects. Now, yes, I'm aware that Gaya sa Pelikula had many issues. But when it was broadcasting, it was a big deal. But it was really this series that I think we need to celebrate. And I'm so looking forward to the next one, though I'm unhappy that they're in New York. I think that was a poor political decision. Anyway, um, Game Boys cannot be kind of, I think, praised enough for taking the logics of BL and using it to create a local story that didn't try to fix BL. So one of my issues with the Pinoy BL industry to this day is that many of the production people try to fix it, and that's because they drunk that Kool-Aid I referred to, and they're still stuck in that pre-2020 mindset. Yeah, I'm about to wrap up. But what Game Boys did was it respectfully used the tropes and logics of BL and then produced this really sensitive local story that was responding to all of the hardships under COVID, but also the hardships that queer people face in the Philippines in their everyday lives, every single day. I like to share this screenshot from Gaya sa Pelikula, not to kind of call out the series for being derivative, but to actually speak to the fact that these popular culture forms are referencing each other. And within the study of kind of East and Southeast Asian media, we've often spoken about the ways in which an inter-Asia referencing kind of structures media production, but that's often been viewed in a very hierarchical way in which, the media of Japan and Korea impacts, for better or worse, the local media cultures of kind of less dominant or powerful Southeast Asian receptive markets. Here we have something that I think is more flat, that isn't hierarchical, that actually is respectful and productive. So just to kind of talk about the new directions that I'm taking the work now, if I had time, I would love to unpack this further, but I'm looking now increasingly at the activism of Thai BL celebrities, and I'm also looking at how the recent kind of BL series and recent kind of decisions that are guiding the genre are increasingly grounded in political concerns that we're not necessarily seeing in other markets in Asia. I'm also increasingly interested in the soft power potentials of Thai BL, and this is part and parcel because I'm actually beginning to work with the Thai Ministry of Culture to kind of think about, and Thai Ministry of Foreign Affairs to think about these broader questions of the Thai wind and kind of emphasizing the need to celebrate and center the queer powers and potentials that I've expressed. And then there's something that I'm specifically looking at in the Japanese context around tourism and contents tourism. I'm going to skip all of these and end on my final note. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope this has been an interesting discussion, and I'm looking forward to everyone's questions, comments, and reactions. Thank you so much for having me.